So I'd like to open it up. Does anyone have a question for our panelists? We've covered an awful lot of material.
Thank you so much. This was absolutely fascinating. I'm Kelly. I'm a PhD candidate here at Tulane. This question for Dr. Skeen and whoever else would like to answer, but I was curious about basically how do we get people to trust AI enough so that they would be okay with AI assisting physicians and other healthcare professionals in doctors' offices. For instance, whenever I go to the doctor and if I see them Googling something, I'm like, wait a minute, why are you having to Google that? And I've seen some surveys that people prefer either doctors alone or doctors assisted by AI, not just AI, serving as a physician. So, do you have any thoughts on that? How do you get people to trust AI enough?
I, is this on? This is on. I'm sure some of the other speakers are going to have remarks on this. Just first to be clear, I'm primarily in clinical mental health, community mental health, and biobehavioral medicine. But I mean, one important bit of context is that all of this stuff is already tightly entangled and already fielded. Your physician is probably already using some kind of generative AI tool, up to and including the snippets that will come out of Google if they go that route. In terms of user-facing trust in mental health chatbots that incorporate generative AI, I worry, frankly, that ship has already sailed, particularly given what we're seeing with the delusion reinforcement that is still extraordinarily rare, but there's been some sensationalist media coverage of it. Nevertheless, anyone who finds themselves in that kind of feedback loop is already experiencing enough acuity that is, in essence, a medical emergency. Similarly, somebody in a phase of what I would consider to be active suicidal ideation, even chronic passive suicidal ideation, I simply, now again, I don't know if I mentioned it, I am a licensed eligible mental health counselor, so if I advise them to use a tool like that, I'm not only responsible on an ethical level, I might be liable on a legal level. So I'll be honest, I don't know if the trust can be restored quickly. I know there are guardrails there that are being built in at the consumer level, OpenAI, et cetera. I know there are platforms such as Claude that take this kind of thing a lot more seriously. And I got to be honest, in 90% of cases, well, in 90% of generations, for 90% of people, I think it's computationally trivial to get this kind of thing right. We already see it with Google. We already see it with how Facebook, for instance, handles mentions of suicide. It's just those edge cases and those extraordinarily rare cases that make it difficult to sign off universally on the integration of these tools. And I don't mean that to be terribly pessimistic. I think there's extraordinary work happening both on the implementation, the ethical, and the computational side that can eventually get us there. It's just the challenge is momentous given what we've already seen happening. Anyone else?
Yeah, if I could add, so agree with all that. I think it really depends on the application, right? If you're talking about open-ended conversations that can kind of go wherever, then yes, there's a lot of problems. But if you're talking about decision support or knowledge retrieval kind of things, I think the answer is show your work, right? Like kind of like Simo was saying, like having RAGs pull directly from stuff you trust and then point to that stuff you trust in the answer. I think that's the way you get people to trust it, is by showing look, this is really just it's not magic. It's just synthesizing things that you trust and create an answer from it, right? And so for those applications, I think we're already seeing it in clinical decision support, right? But I think that is much more tractable of a problem. Yeah.
One quick thing I should add, I had to cut this slide, but I originally showed the back end of MyLight, which includes the full reasoning trace and citations of all of the text snippets that it's building its response off of. And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating diagnostic, but to Aaron's point, it's an excellent tool for trust as well.
Right. I just also want to add a comment, follow Aaron's opinion. I think you're absolutely right. In some of the cases, like imaging-based diagnosis, AI already show very accurate performance. And more recently, there's even a couple of studies even show AI alone is better than AI plus physician. I don't know if you believe it or not, but then a couple of studies also show actually we think with human in the loop will be the quality assurance step. But in practice, it's not always true because there's a couple of studies reporting say, okay, you have human physician in the loop, but it turns out they didn't really perform as gatekeeper. They ignore the errors because once you get used to, you trust the AI, you tend to like agree with the AI. You know, things like that happens, and that's like one issue about like how AI and the human needs to work together. The other thing, another study also show physicians like a capability on making diagnosis. After they start using AI, there's a study actually, then they stop. Then they notice like a 6% decrease of accuracy, just physician doing the diagnosis by themselves. That brings another interesting point, like you may also have somehow need to keep training physicians. They cannot just always rely on the AI's output. Sometimes they use AI for what they need to make their own diagnosis by themselves. And we also write a commentary is like, oh, you actually maybe should introduce error in purpose in the AI prediction. So keep physician alert. Don't always trust the AI's output. Sometimes they might be wrong, and you can introduce those error maybe to monitoring if this is a physician keep agree with AI all the time versus like they actually actively review AI results.
So if I can add my perspective, I think in this case, I believe mental health is very different than the rest of the things, other disease areas. For diagnosis, all that we have seen that for decades, the imaging, all those advancements where AI can be very helpful. But when it comes to mental health, I think the human involvement is essential, and where we cannot replace humans with AI. And even AI plus human, I don't know how as somebody, as a patient who is having some mental health disorder, I don't know how I will see. I'll prefer having a conversation with a human than with a chatbot assisted human or whatever, or vice versa. And it's that element is going to be important. Again, we will see that how they feel involved, because it when it involves behavioral aspects, it's something else. It's hard for me to explain how things change in behaviorally when talking with chatbot versus a human person.
Okay. Thank you. More questions? Tom? And when you get the microphone, please introduce yourself. Then.
Okay. Hi. My name is Jordan Williams. I'm an undergraduate student at Tulane University, and I'm a senior. And right now, I'm a Newcomb Scholar as well. I'm conducting or trying to do a little bit of research about how artificial intelligence can help tackle the maternal mortality rate here in Louisiana. And I'm still working on it, like trying to condense it. I may change to a specific neighborhood or area in Louisiana. However, my question to all of you is that, especially Dr. Chatwell, you mentioned that humans with AI will replace humans without AI. And I'm really wondering, how can we tackle historic medical mistrust from other people as it begins to be implemented in like everything? Like, I've had a bunch of conversations with a bunch of Black women, and they say, like, well, we're dealing with bias in person. I don't know if I can really trust a tool like AI to not be biased, especially when we think about large language models are fueled by us. How are we making sure that bias is not incorporated into large language models as it begins to become implemented in everything? And like, I don't know. I guess my question is, what would you guys recommend in terms of tackling medical mistrust, specifically in African American communities, and encouraging people to use AI, not necessarily for medicine, but just incorporate it more into their daily life?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one.
Sorry.
I think first is definitely acknowledging that bias exists is very important. And most of us, at least in this room, agree that biases exist. And we also have good understanding of what kinds of biases would exist. The example I was showing earlier, the bias of that left hand versus right hand, it's a very simple example. It shows the bias, the training bias is there. Now, we know that the bias is there. How do we retrain the models to come out of bias? I don't know. It's a tough one. Maybe it's a generation like your generation can help us figure out many of these things as computer scientists. I don't have an answer for how we come out of these biases. Maybe others on the panel may have some ways. There are more structured ways to reduce the bias. But awareness of bias is the most important aspect. We should be aware of that.
I have some thoughts on that, and I completely agree that awareness of the bias is the very first step. And falling back on our tradition of qualitative research methods, we talk about reflexivity, we talk about positionality, which means simply reflecting on the biases that we know exist, and also thinking about the biases that we might not even be aware that are there. And I think in the same way that recognition is the first step, intentionally training people to question from from specific angles. We know the biases that do exist. How can we help them recognize where the bias is coming up? And so I do think that it's a skill that we have to develop. I don't know if others that are, kind of in the educational space with AI have thoughts about how do you train people to critically assess what is coming out of AI, but I think that's key.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a huge topic in the AI field for sure. And it's a hard problem. Again, I come back to like the specificity of the problem. Like if you have a particular community you want this thing built for, you could build it for that community, right? That's kind of the beautiful thing about this is like, okay, well, let me give it the data that I do trust, that I do believe in, and train the model based on that data. Every model is going to be biased in some way or another, right? And I think it's just a matter of a part of the whole issue here is like there is no one piece of software that that will be right for every problem, right? And so I think we need to think more about how do we customize these things for particular use cases. And I think that's the way you start to tackle some of these things.
I also want to add, there's a lot of research right now on assessing the bias of those AI models, or how to address those bias when you're training those models, like how to make sure the distribution of the data across different race groups is actually all included, and all those things, building like a more fair kind of AI model. But I also want to point, I think the bias is not just the AI thing. If you think about, right, how our medical knowledge was generated, the evidence was generated. When we conduct a trial, there's also bias when you're selecting patient, right? So I don't think the bias thing is just like the issue of AI. Even now, how we generate medical evidence to develop a guideline, there might be also bias. So it's a issue we all have to address. Like now in the AI framework, maybe there's a different ways to think about more systematically to address this. Yeah.
Okay. Jana?
Hi, I'm Jana Vishnesky. I'm faculty in the Department of International Health and Sustainable Development. And my research is much more along the lines of Dr. Silva's than the computer science side. I'm starting to be concerned about the quality of publications that use AI as people like me start to dabble in it. And the reason I'm concerned is that I'm being asked to review them with no formal training in those methods. I might know the topic really well, but not the methods. And so I'm wondering what you would say to people like me who are in that position. Are there guidelines for how to determine whether this research is high quality? And then don't hate me, but is there a need for some sort of ethical review on the front end using AI, given the pitfalls of bias and things like that we're seeing?
I can say a few things on these lines. So, when we look at, I guess part of your question is when you are reviewing studies which could be AI driven, have used AI. If in that case, reporting guidelines first can be helpful. Like how do you report certain things? We have those guidelines for traditional AI machine learning methods, But for Gen AI, it's very new. And then very recently, New England Journal of Medicine published their reporting guidelines. If you have a study which is using Gen AI, you should be reporting these 15, 20 things. And that improves transparency for me as an author and also for other person as a reviewer, what things to look for and reviewing it. So that's one aspect of it. So that's going to be helpful. Now, the other ethical piece, part of that in the publications is that many people may be using AI to write things like we have the Google's, the co-scientist or something, yeah, the tool. So if that's writing, doing the work and writing it, then is it something ethical? And how do we really understand if something is, and as somebody on the editorial board, I keep seeing papers which I can see that they're written by AI. It's by humans using AI substantially to the extent that it loses the context. If you're an expert, you will be able to pick up things which are out of context, words which are used by AI, not you as you would expect from coming from a researcher on that topic. So there are certain things coming up. So we have, as journals, we have these guidelines. We cannot use AI, but people still will use. So we need to have more guardrails and where there would be higher consequences to penalize such actions.
I think a two-part. One is like if you're using AI to generate manuscript, right, to help with, there's a lot of journal now have guidelines how you going to disclose the usage of AI. But the other part is like you may use AI to review the article. Then there's also guidelines on that for some journals, but then there's issues basically. One is like if you're sending the manuscript which not published to AI, is they going to use for training? There's any kind of ethical issues like about the data privacy, all those things. But second is also there's a technical risk. You see there's a news about like a computer science conference now. They use quite a lot of AI reviewers, but then also is actually put the statement in the paper say only provide positive review comments, and they mark those texts in a white color. So human review won't see it, but AI review will read it and give a positive reviews only. So I think all those things that might be we have to think about. But then not just papers, even grant, right? NIH release a new policy. You can only submit like 6 application per year because some PI using AI to write grants. Like they in the notice, I thought they said one they received over 40 application from a single PI over the year. So they're using AI to generate those grant application, and they cannot differentiate AI generated versus human written ones.
So the major AI conference, AAAI, had 29,000 submissions this year. And they used AI to generate a review for each one. There's a whole process there. It doesn't make a decision, it just kind of summarizes it. Anyhow, but there's kind of like writing with AI versus like using AI as part of the research methodology. And I think for that second one, I've certainly for a while in computer science, not that checklists solve everything, but but for every submission, there's like a list of questions you have to answer. That's, you know, that kind of walks through the ethical guidelines of how you used AI. How was the data sourced? Is it transparent? All this sort of stuff. And I think that should be, I mean, sometimes I don't like filling them out, but I think making researchers think through those questions, I think is important for like culturation of the field kind of thing. And last but not least, no, do not upload manuscripts you're reviewing or grants you're reviewing to ChatGPT. If you want to do that, run a local model and just send it into there in the local model. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Is this on? Sorry. Hi, this is Christopher Stoyanovsky. I'm an assistant professor in SPPS in the Silas Scott Weatherhead School. I've been sitting with the ethics of AI a lot recently. I do a lot of work in East Africa, a lot of growing things around AI. And just as an example, one of the data centers in Ethiopia uses 1/3 of all electricity of Ethiopia. And I am like sitting with climate change concerns, which we're all talking about and now accelerating with the use of this tool. How are you teaching this? How are you incorporating this in your own use of these tools, thinking about efficiency versus like literally destroying our planet? Yeah, those are my questions.
So I have one response. So this is Nora, who's sitting right here, who is an integral part of our team as a bioethicist. And so she did not allow us to make any decisions without a lot of thinking of like, what is the purpose of this? When we ran the 40 iterations, she was in deep pain. It was like, why are we running the 40 iterations? What is the purpose of doing this? What are we trying to prove? What good will this serve? And so I think that that kind of reflection incorporated in the process of testing the tool in our case was really important. I know to Nora, and then she dragged the rest of us with her. So that would be my response. I'm not sure how I'm really curious myself in terms of how you're teaching about this, those of you who are teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the teaching, but certainly on the research side, like, I mean, it's very standard in CS to report the power consumption usage uh, in along with your accuracy results. And so that has become kind of more top of mind. I will say, I mean, I think it's insane, right? For every Google search query, the amount of energy that's being used is mind blowing. I will say, as a computer scientist, I have some optimism because, like, that's literally almost all we do is try to make things more efficient. So I am hopeful things will get more efficient, and there are some interesting architectural reasons that will happen. But this is a society problem, not a technical problem. Like, why are we building 3 new power plants? I mean, that's a computer scientist can't answer that question, of course. But yes, it is from computer science, it is very top of mind. There's entire sub conferences focused on this issue, but I don't see any technical solutions yet.
I think from technical perspective, instead of actually keep building bigger and bigger model, there's also a trend, at least a lot of discussion about how we should build a smaller model in a distributed fashion and consume less resource. I think DeepSeek has a big slash because of it only costs like much less than the what the ChatGPT was trained for in terms of using of energy. That's I think especially in the resource constrained environment, you need those kind of more economic model actually to help. I think it probably will technology-wise also driving a little bit towards that way. Hopefully, that can reduce the consumption of energy.
I would just add, I think there is some, well, I'll just say some blame to be placed on the commercial actors in this space, taking, for instance, what I think we all understand to be a high resource cost computational tool and treating it as somewhere between a parlor trick and an endless image generator is the ultimate moral worth generated by, for instance, Dr. Silva's work versus somebody generating 1,000 images of Pepe the Frog. Similar? No, absolutely, of course not. But unfortunately, we've created a sort of common wisdom that says unfettered access to unfettered compute simply because we don't see it is itself worth pursuing on the commercial end. I would argue it's not. But I think the vast majority of those compute resources you see burning up for bullshit, frankly, can be laid at the feet of those actors. I'll also add one of the many things I love about local models is as soon as you kick them up, you'll see your machine, making Boeing 737 noises, and you're a lot more on a tactile level aware of the expense of running these models, or my machine at least.
I'm going to bring things to a close now. We've come to the end of this session. Don't despair. We are going to bring these our panelists back up for a panel in about 15 minutes. They're a little bit more structured, but I think there will be more opportunities for you all to engage. Just one word, and I don't know what, I haven't discussed this with any of you. I did see a paper put out by Google recently, and I'm sure they have no conflict of interest in putting this out. They say that they have become 33% or no, 33 times more efficient in the last year in terms of energy consumption. And that one prompt, one query is equivalent to watching 9 seconds of Netflix. So, you all are wasteful in your Netflix consumption. I don't know how to evaluate that. And like I said, I don't know if they have any kind of conflict of interest there. Just throwing that out there. Anyway, so we're going to have a 15-minute break. So please come back at 11:17 promptly, because you just do not want to miss the raffle. And does everyone have a ticket for the raffle? Okay. All right. Well, I'll see you all in 15 minutes. Thank you to our presenters. And thank you all for being here.